Hello, hello. We're going live. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to another episode of the Property by Kazi Ask Someone Else Instagram Lives. We're here each and every Sunday talking to you about property with an industry guest on each and every week. And today is no different. First, I'd say hello and thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I see Carl, I see DB Electricals, I see Mr. Vegas, I see LN Capital, so lots of regulars. It's good to see you all today. Let me know where you're joining from, how you are and how your weekend's been. Like always, we're going to have a special guest on and we're going to have Jerome from the Property Planning Game talking to us today. He's an amazing guest. He has dealt with over £36 million worth of GDV in property development. So somebody that, if you're looking to smash it in property, this is definitely one that you want to be listening to make sure you get all those gems and all that great advice. Let me add him in right now. Whilst we are waiting for him to join, I'll just let you know that this is going to be the last episode until January. It's the first episode of season 4, but last episode till January. Jerome, how are you doing?
All right, Kazi, how are you today?
I'm very, very well, thank you. How's your Sunday treating you?
Sunday's been pretty quiet. I mean, I've been looking forward to this all day. Looking forward to next week, and obviously, you know, it's kind of the final week to get deals done next week, isn't it? I think, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, definitely to get anything done, we can always be looking, but to really have anybody actually respond to us, it is that sort of final stretch of the year.
Yeah, correct. I mean, we've been getting emails from lawyers for a couple of weeks with like, the email footer says that the final day for completions is the 17th of December.
Yeah, no, that is. I think a lot of people are sort of looking to clock out there having, which I think is a quite deserved longer break over Christmas because of COVID. A lot of people were backlogged, working hard, working under difficult circumstances. So we appreciate them all. Before I get into you and who you are, just a quick general information for everybody. So like I mentioned, this will be the last live. So proud to have Jerome on for our last live until the new year. So this is the first episode of season 4. We've got 3 previous seasons. That's 36 hours worth of great content from architects to developers to property sourcers to property traders to construction managers. So anybody, any field that you want to get into, there's going to be a live that's going to suit you. They're all available on the Amazon podcast, Apple podcast, Spotify, whatever your favorite DSP is. You can go and check them out. And you just got to type in Ask Somebody Else by Property by Kazi and you'll be able to find those. But it's not about those today. It's about the man in front of us. Jerome, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm good.
I would like you to give us your best bio, your best Instagram style bio to explain who you are to the people that maybe don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm 48. I'm Jerome Roy. I'm from London originally, northwest London. Now live in Manchester. Been in property since 1994. Started out as an estate agent making the tea and doing the photocopying. Then set up my own estate agency in central London before they called it Prime or Super Prime. Mm-hmm. That was Marylebone, like Baker Street, St John's Wood, that area. Got a shop front, just kind of winged it for a few years. Didn't really have a plan. I just knew that I could do all right at it. Built up a residential estate agency, sold that out in 2006. Managed about 120 properties. It was sales, lettings, property management. The sort of classic estate agency model, years before things like Purple Bricks and all that stuff appeared, right? Mm-hmm. Years before social media, Kazi, as well, right? It's like the way that we advertised our properties to sell was in the Evening Standard Home and Property Guide when it first came out. I don't even know, is that still a thing?
I don't know, because I remember talking about just stuff that's just not a thing anymore. Like I remember when you used to be looking if it was for a property to buy, rent, and the Loop would be a good place to find a deal.
Yeah. Lou. Yeah, no, that's right. We used to go in Lou. Then I worked in commercial property in the city for like a blue-blooded firm of chartered surveyors, RICS and stuff, on a really good consultancy package. Credit crunch came in '08.
Yeah.
Went into work the day after Lehman Brothers went belly up and Northern Rock went, and everyone was kind of like they were in March 2020, right? Really worried, like, is it the end of the world? And of course it's not. And I lost that really highly paid role. And I needed to reflect on where I was going in my life. I had 2 young kids and started buying individual units in zone 4, zone 5, zone 6. So typically areas like Haringey, Manor House, Green Lanes, all that stuff. And then kept my head above water, moved into office to resi permitted development when it all kicked off in 2013. It's like the reality of permitted development is that people had always converted office buildings to resi. You can just do it quicker. That's all that really changed. It's the speed of it, the speed to be able to make a gain. But and now, last 7 years, it's land without planning. So taking the highest risk, basically, having to back my judgment on whether you can get planning on something, and typically from a minimum of 1 acre upwards. It's been very challenging. There are nights where you don't sleep properly. I don't know how you are managing stress. It's still work in progress for me, all that stuff. I've got to be honest. But I do get up at 4 in the morning and worry about stuff. But I've always been like that. So yeah, that's me. I've been in the business 27 years.
So you've been a little while.
A long time, and it's only the last 18 months that I've started to understand things like property education, but we can, cover that later on if you want.
So I think my first starting point, because a lot of the people that are in here, like, they're hearing all of the stuff you've done, and a lot of them are going to be really impressed and amazed, but a lot of them are quite early on in their journey, and it sort of links slightly into property education or maybe property advice. But my first question would be, when you first started your first journey in property, so that was you, like you said, making the tea, doing, whether it was a Saturday job or a full-time job, but in property. That's one thing that a lot of people say, that if you're not ready to invest or don't have the funds to invest, how much value did you get out of that experience of starting to work for somebody else in an estate agency?
Without that, I don't think that I'd be where I was today, because I was around some really sharp operators. I was 20, they were in their 40s, and they were seriously sharp players, right? So the guys that worked at the estate agency and owned the estate agency were already buying, trading, holding, renting out their own product, right? Because you've got access to the deals, There were guys I was working with that were like very early into Shoreditch, when you could buy a flat for like sub 100 grand.
Different world.
Yeah.
We always look at the properties that we wish we could have bought. In hindsight, I think when people always say to me, like, what's your biggest mistake in property? And I'm like, it's every property that I didn't buy.
Yeah. But I think it's important to have that mantra of not having any regrets.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, it's the learning, and that's why I asked you that question in regards to your experience, because a lot of people ask me, I'm this age, I'm 18, I'm 19, I'm 20, I want to get into property, I want to start buying and selling, but I don't have the capital yet. But I think what you said and what you've touched upon is really important, that gaining that experience, particularly getting paid to gain that experience, you're seeing firsthand. Not only are you learning from them, but also the exposure to money and the exposure to how people actually construct a deal. What is, you'll see people that their developments actually don't sell and really struggle to sell. And you'll see an example of why. So when you move on to doing your own, it's a lot easier to like not make those mistakes, because you've seen them and you've learned for free or learn whilst getting paid.
Yeah, correct. I mean, so these guys that I work with was my first exposure to money. Even
Yeah.
though I was an estate agent, one of their business models on the side was buying stuff off plan,
Hmm.
right? So I'd never heard of that in my life. I
Yeah.
haven't done it, but it's a thing. You buy off plan, phase one, get a bit of a discount, trade it on before it's completed. That was one of his that was a model.
Hmm.
The other one was buying at auction, and he would target stuff that had been damaged by fire
Yeah.
damaged product that you couldn't get insurance on.
Yeah, and I think all of these things, like you just highlighted, two really specific things, but learning strategies and specialization, that's another thing that you've gone to do in your vocation in the future. But it's something that I often talk about myself that, it's very hard to be a jack of all trades and do everything at once. But the idea of, like some people literally just focused on buying off plan. And I know people that sometimes they'll let you buy off plan for a really low deposit and you can buy a load of units. I know somebody that made tens of millions through off-plan deals because they were actually getting, because they bought off plan when it was so cheap and prices went so high and they bought so many, because they could undercut the developer was actually paying them market rent not to sell them, just so, and I mean, there's so much opportunity there, but obviously you have to look into it and work out what works for you and how your circumstances match to a strategy. But I think definitely, learning about individual strategies and learning what does and doesn't work for you is going to be massive when it comes to your growth as in the space.
Yeah, and you know what? Something else that I don't think has changed is trying to grab onto the coattails of people that are more successful than you.
Hmm.
Okay, so for example, there was no such thing as property training, right? It didn't
Yeah.
exist. So basically, the only way you learn was by making mistakes. I think people are quite fortunate today that
Oh,
they're
definitely.
able to access, as long as they're genuine educators,
Hmm.
you got an opportunity to be around someone like you or someone like me that's going to hold your hand. I didn't have that. So what I did
Yeah.
was I gravitated towards older people
Hmm.
in business and tried to figure out how they were doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely the social media and just the abundance of information that's currently out there. Like the caveat that I would say is there's also a load of rubbish information out there, but it's your responsibility to go and find, like with anyone, there's going to be good and bad teachers, there's going to be good and bad books, and to do your own due diligence. But the amount of information that's out there, and a lot of it is out there for free as well, that you can take the time to actually set yourself on the right path and know which direction you want to go into. Because if you want to learn all about planning game, then Jerome's going to be the best person to follow. He's going to be a great, even, you might not even speak to him for a couple of months, but he's going to be a great person to follow just to see what he's up to. He's always putting out loads of good information about the difference between different types of sites that he's looking at, how one went, honest conversations in regards to issues they're having or not having, the wins and the losses, and the ability to be able to do that, I think is a massive win for people that are starting out now.
Yeah. So where are you at, just for example, like kind of right now on your journey?
So I've been in property for about 8 years. I had some other businesses first that I just wanted to transition and pivot out of to get into property. So sort of sold up and kind of have what they would call, I didn't have a residential mortgage, didn't have a buy to let. My first purchase was a bridging loan from an auction, which I think my broker at the time called like a baptism of fire because you have to learn everything very quickly. But that was like my litmus test and my proof of concept that, I was good at identifying a property that whether or not it's below market value, but the important part is the scope to add value. So my initial strategy was buying um, properties that we would use license to alter agreements to turn one beds to two beds and two beds to three beds, just adding value, particularly in London at the time, sort of 2013.
there were a lot of areas that were growing pretty rapidly. And if you could mesh the growth with adding value, you could really get some good return on investments. I think the difference between us, whereas you do a lot of planning game stuff, I actually focus on doing the build out. So my focus on the moment is in conversions. That's, I've built a good sort of team of people that I work with, from my architects to planning consultants to, my solicitors, to be able to know which properties are ripe for conversions, where things are going to work. And typically we've been looking at purchasing sites anywhere from sort of 500 up to about 700, and end up with a GDV of 1.2 to 1.6. So the numbers work quite well on them. And once you build up a pipeline of those, they're pretty safe as well, because we kind of know the process. We go for, my architect always talks about, would you rather a quick no or a slow yes? Which is kind of what we're working with at the moment. So that's been my focus. Done a few new builds, bits of office to residential, but my focus at the moment is on conversions.
Okay. So where do you see it all going in the next 12 months, just generally?
The myself or the market as a whole? Are we talking
The
about?
market as a whole.
The market as a whole, there is like a lot of, sort of deflationary factors that, could play a role on the market, in regards to just the impact of COVID, the impact of Brexit, that I think, when you look at these more macro effects, when we say like the average man on the street doesn't feel the impact straight away, the understanding of what Brexit really means doesn't mean anything until you feel it in your pocket, or doesn't mean anything until there's maybe some issues with job stability or something else, or different types of growth. So I think we're going to see, a slowdown. But whenever there's a slowdown, it's always an opportunity that if you are fortunate enough to be, cash rich or have a level of capital, that it's a great opportunity to make money and invest. When there's market movement, it means there's more opportunity to make money than if there's sort of more of a stagnant or sort of slowly inflating market. What about yourself? What are your thoughts?
I think we're in for quite an interesting 12 months ahead. It's the way that we operate is that construction costs are really important when
Yeah.
you do your viability, because I'm always looking at the back end of the deal, probably like you are. I'm not even looking at the point I'm buying it. I'm already looking at who's going to be living in it when I've got planning. So I'm kind of reverse engineering it, right? And the bottom line is there will always be money around, right? There are huge amounts of money around. This is what I get asked on my property development training program. People worry about getting hold of money.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, as you get older and you get more experience, you realize that that's the most simple part of it. And so when I talk about access to money, right, this is what I mean. So all of us have picked the phone up. I bet you have picked the phone up to mates, right? I have. And kind of, or people I know, and asked them to put money in deals, right? And that's okay to a certain point. But I think to truly scale a business, if you want to go massive, you got to understand how to raise institutional money.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, which is banks. Okay? Because one day you might phone up your mate or your angel investor and they might not be able to provide any capital. So that gets you to so far, but it's mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, because
Where do you want to, you know what I mean? It's like, where do you want to be in life? Do you want to be all in, or do you want to just be kind of sparring? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because we had this, we filmed a short series. It was called like Property Insiders, and it was about different people's journeys within property. And we had Anthony on there, Anthony Leville from Volume Property, and he was talking. His like one of the most lines that resonated with me, and I think we've spoken about in the past, but he put it really well in response to what you just said, was, finding the money isn't the most difficult part. Getting to the point where you need the money is the hard part. Which is like actually finding that once you've got the deal will do the talking. Because if you've got a deal that stacks on paper, you're going to find the money for it, if it's a good deal. And I think that's one thing, it's, don't get me wrong, like money is super important in property. I'm not downplaying the fact that particularly to get started, money is really important. But if you're able to hone your own skill set, get used to the industry, what works and what doesn't work, how to construct to make a deal work, it's possible to raise the finance. You'll find people that want to get involved.
Yeah, something that I explain to people starting out, and as you said, there's probably people on here that are looking for their first deal, right? Mm-hmm. Which I don't call a deal until I bought it. I call it an opportunity, right? Just want to kind of clarify the whole speak that I operate by, right? I think the word deal's bandied about a bit. For me, a deal is something that I'm transacting on, right? And a lot of people say to me, I found an opportunity, but I don't know how to raise the money. And my answer is just go and get the opportunity tied up, get it into legals and worry about it later. Because let's be honest, right? Even though you've got a skill set and so have I, it's like everyone's still winging it, right? There's this common misconception. It's like the British government's been winging it, right, for hundreds of years. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of no different, yeah? Okay? And so to this day, yeah, I know where I'm going to go and I know I'm going to get planning. But when I see something that I want to buy, I will just tie it up. I'll get it agreed, get solicitors instructed, and then I'll start picking the phone up. I still do that.
Yeah. And I think that as a whole, like the honesty of that is important because like everybody looks at somebody and I can look at, you can look at a bio and see like, oh, like that you've done 37 million. I'm thinking, oh, that's a lot of millions. Like, how are we gonna get there? But like, it's always refreshing to have conversations. People look at me and think, oh, you've done this amount and how am I going to get here? But we're all just constantly learning. And I think, if you get to the point where you think you know everything, that's probably the point where you probably messed up because you got too confident and things might go downhill because there's always so much to learn. There's so much that's moving in the space. There's so many new opportunities that you have to stay versed with. So I think just that knowing that we're sort of, whether or not we're teachers to somebody, we're still students to somebody else at all points of our journey.
Yeah, correct. But that this all comes down to your mindset and your headspace, right? And we're all obviously different types of personalities and people. And the way that I operate is that it's the same effort to get planning for 5 houses, Kazi, as it is to get planning for 50 houses, right? It's the same skill set. Like if you're going to buy one house in London that you can split into 5 flats, that's the same skill set to buy a block of 3 houses and go for 20 flats, right? There's only one difference. It's just more expensive to buy it and fund it and build it. It's the same skill. And that's what I try and impress upon people because, it can be quite scary, right? There's all these large amounts of money getting spoken about, but the reality is I believe that this whole existence, everything's in the mind.
In terms of delivering it. So let's go back to your first deal in terms of like planning game deal. So after setting up, after leaving, after the sort of the crash of 2008, getting into property flips, what was your first deal like? What did it look like? How long did it take? What were the numbers like?
Yeah, I mean, the first deal was a studio flat bought at auction for 35 grand. Which
a lot of people will be very jealous when they hear that number at the moment.
Yeah, but it's like things have changed a lot, but also it's like I don't get hung up on how things rise in value because this is a long game. It's really important to emphasize this. This is what this is. This isn't get rich quick. It needs a new kitchen and bathroom.
Mhm.
It was a leasehold. It was a flat in a block that had awful common parts. It was a 150-year lease. The block needed a lot of money spending on it, so the leaseholders had to contribute. That's why it was so cheap, right? And spent £7,000 on it, rented it out, and that doubled in value in about a year. But that's, that's London as well. It's like I'm not in the London market anymore. It's like once you leave the London market, right, it's difficult to get back in.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot because I obviously have only ever operated in London, and I've got used to it. And I think, don't get me wrong, sometimes when I speak to my friend Alfred Jade, and he does like HMOs in Coventry, and I see like his monthly returns, I'm like, could do with a bit more income. But then it's that balance of the trade-off of the returns and I think at the moment I'm just chasing capital growth and trying to grow my cash pot to do bigger deals, which I'm like, I can forego the extra holiday or the extra pair of trainers and just focus on growing that cash pot, because really at this point, I feel like the more money I have from a disposable standpoint, potentially the more I'll just spend. So focus on growing that cash point. So then fast forward all the way to sort of present day. What are you working on at the moment? What are you hoping to achieve with them?
Yeah, so the first site I bought as the land without planning model was 27 acres up here, which was bought unconditional. For those that don't know,
for those that don't know acres, put that in concept of
okay,
football pitch.
Yeah, correct. So basically, a full-size adult football pitch is 1 acre, so 27 football pitches, right? And that was unconditional. For those that don't know what that means, it means that you're probably funding it with cash unless you're able to get bridging finance. But if it hasn't got planning, you won't be able to bridge it. And this didn't have planning. And it was just a field, basically.
And basically, that's because you're probably paying a premium above what the field is worth on the basis that it's potentially could get planning, but the bridges would look at it based on just what it's worth as a field.
Yeah.
And you'd struggle to get any real sort of uplift on LTV because their exposure's too high if you don't get planning.
Yeah, correct. And the money that we paid for it was based on the value of farmland per acre. So I didn't put any hope value in it for the owner. And I do think luck plays a huge part in business, by the way, right?
Yeah.
I don't believe in coincidences. That's different. Do I believe in that expression, the harder you work, the luckier you get? I don't really know. But I know luck plays a part. It's like today with like the finish of the Grand Prix. I don't watch Formula One racing, but I watched that last lap. So whether you saw it, there was a huge amount of luck at play there, right?
Well, that's currently going through legals at the moment.
Apparently, which will be another example that the only people will benefit will be the lawyers, Kazi, because they're the ones that always benefit, right? But yeah, so 27 acres without planning on a site that was a field. So it wasn't brownfield. Brownfield is land that's previously developed or built on. So the houses we're in right now, this moment, all of us are brownfield.
I think give us some buzzwords in development. Obviously, we hear brownfield, greenfield, exactly. So give us some buzzwords in this space for people that are not familiar at all.
Yeah. So brownfield is previously developed land. It could be a petrol station, a light industrial estate, an MOT garage, a car park. It's previously developed or built on land.
Okay.
Which are the most straightforward to get planning on.
But this was not. This was just a field, which is classified as what?
Classified as greenfield or open countryside. Okay. So it's the sort of field that like horses graze on. You know, when you're on the train and you're going out of London, it's not Greenbelt, right? But it's like one step down from that. You know, when you're on the train and you're looking at all those fields and you think nothing's ever got built on, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of that, so greenfield. But I basically knew that I'd get planning on part of it.
Okay.
The rest of it's been land bank. Land banking means when you can bank land like you bank money, you're banking land to revisit at a later date when you're in the financial position or the planning policy has changed to maybe go for another 100 units on it or 150 or whatever it may get. So I knew I'd get planning on 2 acres,
And
which is
that where
2
you got
football pitches. Yeah, which is exactly what we're planning for, yeah. And the rest
How
of it
many,
is just banked.
and how many units is that, or did you get there?
9.
Got 9 units. And
Nine.
but a lot of the time, did you build those out or did you
I
sell those?
built those. I
Oh,
built
you built
those.
those.
I actually built them during COVID, so it's like a double-edged sword. So what happened was, I haven't paid 30% more on my new build cost by building it now. I was lucky,
Yeah.
but I was aiming at people over 75 years old that were all at home shielding.
Yeah.
You can't win it all,
Yeah.
right? It's like, and you learn that you cannot do it all and you can't have your cake and eat it all. It just don't work like that. And the other really important thing is, I don't know whether you're like this, but trading stuff on or selling stuff on, you've got to sell it at a level that someone else is making money on it, or you won't sell it.
Of course, yeah. You have to leave some meat on the bone, or otherwise.
You've always got to leave meat on the bone because greed kills. Greed kills deals.
Yeah,
right?
I think I'm in the other space now. At the moment, most of pretty much, apart from just some annoying stuff, I've had issues with leases, and I've just said, you know what, somebody else can deal with this. I'm not waiting to serve the section 42 or whatever it was, the notice. Most of the stuff I'll build out, but I do think, when I look at my trajectory, that particularly if you want to uplift in volume and the number of deals that you can do, then becoming a property trader almost as opposed to a property investor can be a really way to maximize your efficiencies and your return on investments, and also save some stress sometimes as well in terms of the build up.
So what do you do with the majority of your product? Do you hold it or do you do it up and sell it?
Most of it at the moment I'm selling because, capital at the end of the day is finite. We don't have unlimited capital. And if, in an ideal world, I would have kept everything, that I've built because I believe that I've built it to a good standard. I invest in areas where there's been, significant investment in infrastructure, where prices are going to go up, quite significantly. However, it's a means to an end. And like you just said, you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't want to go and do bigger developments, but not have any cash to go and do those. So if you're doing £2 million worth of developments, even if you get all your money back out, that's 500,000 if you go on a buy to let 75% loan to value that you're leaving in that deal. You don't have to go and do your next deal. Also, we've spoken sort of touched briefly about the property education space, and there's a lot of conversations around people saying, oh, it's just easy to go and find these unicorn deals where they work for everything. So you can have a great uplift in value, you can pull all of your money out, and they yield really well. In London, yield is more of a different conversation than it is outside of London. So if I'm looking at investment, I don't just want to end up with a default portfolio that's maybe yielding pretty poorly, even if the appreciation is quite good. So generally speaking, I do my flips, and then when I'm saying, okay, I want to add some stock to the portfolio, I'll go and target specific units that I think, look, either that's going to have really good capital appreciation in the long term, or maybe a commercial unit that's going to yield well, or maybe a HMO. But I've sort of diversified to build up a specific portfolio alongside, completing the flips.
Do you want to talk about funding and the whole funding space right now? I'd be interested to know how you fund your deals, and then I will do the same if that's okay.
Yeah, no, funding's we touched on, obviously, the fact that I think the more you get into the industry, the more you'll realize that there's so much money out there, and it's just a case of you working out a system for you to unlock that money. Now, if that starts with investor finance, so private equity, looking at how you fund things, because a lot of people also sort of starting, if we work backwards, a lot of people's first property investment is their residential home. So really understanding what you can actually borrow based on your income, based on your credit score, based on your expenses as well, is a really good way to actually work out how you can start your initial property investment. Because once you buy a house, you're an investor, you've bought an asset. So I think that's important to understand, and a good starting point, and a really efficient way to use your capital. Generally, starting out, I raised some investor finance, private equity, early on, sort of 5, 6 years ago. That was all repaid pretty early, and since then, I generally use bridging loans. More recently, because I wanted to increase the volume that I'm doing, I've started to JV with a few partners where effectively they provide 100% of the funding, and then we do it as a split in terms of the profit share off the back end. But it was just a case of, if I was finding too many deals to be able to fund myself, I didn't really want to become a packager. There wasn't enough money for it. Wasn't worth my time. So I thought, you know what? Rather than do two deals a year, why don't I try and do 8? And I'd rather, they always say, would you rather 100% of £100 or 50% of 100,000? And sometimes volume makes sense. When I'm doing my own deals, generally it's bridging, just through convenience. A lot of the time, although bridging sounds really expensive, it can sound scary, and you do have to do your due diligence, and you do have to know what your exit strategies are going to be. Bridging basically puts you in a pretty similar position to being a cash purchaser. And being a cash purchaser means that what you can do is you can use that position to negotiate. So even if your bridging costs were going to cost you £30,000 for the year, if you negotiate £50,000 off day one, you're still in a better end position when you look at your numbers at the end of the deal. And that's one of the reasons I know a lot of people lean towards private equity, but for me, I want the convenience. I want my money when I want it to make the deal work. What about yourself?
So all of those points you've raised are really relevant, and I'm going to try and start back at the beginning of that. Mm-hmm. So you talked about people buying their own home, which you don't pay tax on the gain, everyone, which you may or may not know. It's capital gains exempt, which means, as Kazi has said, the first profit you're making is tax-free. So that is a great start. Bridging money, I believe, is the go-to product for developers. It's bridging and development finance, basically.
Yeah.
Those are the two products, right? And I mean, it's interesting because I kind of see these things on Instagram where people are offering a fixed return, and I look at how much I'm paying for bridging. There isn't much difference.
Yeah, and it's just like, don't get me wrong. Like for me, if you said, look, Kaz, I've got money, and if I'm going to pay a bridger basically 10% over a 12-month period, I'd rather pay somebody else, but it just all depends on time frame, how quickly, because speed is important. Speed is what could mean you missing out on the deal completely.
Yeah, I mean, on bridging, the only fundamental difference on cost is the arrangement fees, the in and out, and the lender's legals and the lender's valuation and all that stuff that you lump on it. But I tell people it's really important to get a financial identity with a lender as soon as you can. And when I say that, is that I would rather take bridging money because that's giving me the financial ID and the financial track record with an institution. It's like borrowing development finance. It's not cheap because of the fees, right? But it means that if you're going to...
For those that are not familiar, again, I'll like to try and give people a bit more information while they're here. So what's kind of your ballpark for fees? Obviously, I know it differs for loan to value, but bridges, what would you say people are paying a month at the moment?
So let's maybe do a quick financial illustration on this. So let's say you're borrowing £250,000. and you're paying what, 0.65 a month?
Yeah, on about sort of what a net of about 63 to anywhere between sort of 63 to 68, like net advance. I reckon it's about
Yeah,
right to say.
and 2% arrangement fee, could be 1% arrangement fee.
But again, that's relationships as well, because the better relationship you've
Correct.
got, the more likely they are to going to, because with all these banks, it's risk and reward. If you're deemed as lower risk, they're happy to lend you money for cheaper because you're lower risk to them, so they're happy to charge less for that.
Yeah, and you know what? This is like really, really, really relevant stuff you're coming up with. So someone like Barrett's or Barclay Homes on funding are not paying what we're paying people, right? They're probably paying 2 or 3% a year on a 20 million development finance facility.
Yeah.
And this now goes back to the financial identity and getting a track record with a lender. So you can't get that raising angel money. You can get that relationship with your angel investor. I get it, right? And I've done it. Do I still do it? Not really. Okay. Because the only way I'm going to scale is by building a relationship with a bank, an institution, right? So 10% a year on a bridge, right? Kind of. Yeah. You got your fees. Development finance. Shall I just explain to people what that is?
Yeah, I think mate, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of the time it's spoken about very interchangeably with bridging loans. So I think the differentiation is quite important.
Yeah. So the reason why we only use bridging and development finance is because the lender that's providing the development finance will be the lender that is going to take out the bridger, which then enables you to build.
Hmm.
And development finance is specifically in place to help you build something. So I'm talking ground up development finance. So how do you fund your builds, your conversions? Is it cash or you
Yeah,
borrowing that?
I fund them cash to be fair. Like
Yeah,
I could fund them. I mean, for example, technically on the JVs, they're being funded by
yeah,
the private equity. However, when I'm doing it, if I've got the cash, then I just fund it because on top of the monthly, you've also got more often than not, even though you pay on a drawdown facility, so you pay on how much you've used, you've also got the inspection costs, which also add up a lot. When you've got like a £500, £800 per site visit cost, and then you end up with, it depends what increment you're drawing down at. If you're drawing down at 50,000, whatever the case may be, um, you know, and it all depends because some like drawdowns will allow you to draw down as little as 20,000, which sounds good because you only need 20,000 up front to start. But the downside of that is for every 20,000 you draw down, you've got to have another inspection, which means you could end up with 10 inspections over a project that add in an extra £8,000 to cost, for example. So I think you've always got to kind of look at scenario and work out what works best for you and what would you do that money sort of elsewhere if it wasn't, going towards the development costs.
yeah. I think funding it with cash, or even if it's angel money, it's still cash, is the way forward in terms of the start of people's process. Because when you raise development finance from an institution, they pay you in arrears,
Mm.
which is 4 to 6 weekly in arrears, because the bank don't let themselves get ahead of the development. They don't allow you to get ahead. And what that means is that the bank always comes out on top. So that's
Yeah.
that added level of security, which means that you're forward funding the
Yeah.
scheme at every single drawdown.
And they charge you for those drawdowns. So it's like you just got
Correct.
to work it out. And I mean, everybody's got to work out what works best for them. The other side of it is, a lot of the time, in not just property courses, but social media, Instagram, you see a lot of stuff about, yeah, I got 100% of, my purchase or 100% of my bill costs. But what also people need to understand, and I think is really important, is that's a lot of exposure because you're on you're really at the peak of exposure. So if the market moves a little bit or something goes a little bit wrong, and if you do all that and just have the money sitting in the bank anyway, my question would be, well, then you're paying all this money, and then what's the money doing this in the bank? Because you're paying money and you're not earning any interest on that money over there. And if you don't have that money, then you are taking a lot of risk with that level of exposure. If there is, like the material hike in prices, for example, could have been catastrophic for somebody that's at 100% bill cost, 100% purchase, like really high finance. But again, it's down to everybody. Everybody's got a different attitude towards risk. Do it.
But I think it's just important to understand that your level of exposure to risk in such circumstances.
Yeah, but so that now moves on to making your money when you buy and not when you sell.
And that's it. That's literally, everybody's been in property. Like we've said it before when we first spoke off camera, and anyone that's been in for a long time, that was one of the first lessons that I got. As a sort of green property developer, still wet behind the ears, trying to find a deal. And, I'm trying to explain why I'm going to do this amazing bathroom that's going to add all this money. But it's like you make your money when you buy in property. If you buy at the right price, and it doesn't always mean buying below market value. You can buy at market value, but have a plan to add value. But you make your money with a plan when you buy, because there's always going to be a ceiling price.
But then on the other side of that, people will ask themselves, so how do you get a track record? Right? So a track record, everyone, in very simple terms, is doing a deal. So you're known at that point. You're known either by your angel investor, the estate agent that sold it to you, the bridging funder if you've gone down that route, your builders if it's the first time you've used them. And to get the track record, that first deal might just have to be the deal that washes its face and gets you to the next deal.
That is a again, like everybody has different different attitudes, and I've heard some differing perspectives on this, but I'm with you 100% there, that sometimes just doing a deal is the experience that you get, the contacts that you make, the track record that you build with people, but also that we touched on earlier, the more you're doing, the more likely you are to get lucky. So the fact that you did that deal, and some of my best deals in terms of 100% return on capital happened because I bought somewhere that was like, it's going to keep the team busy. It's going to do, it's going to make a little bit, it's going to make sort of the bottom end of what I'd like to make, but I'm just going to do it. Ended up buying the flat upstairs, meant I could buy the whole freehold. And I did a loft conversion, which meant in the space of 9 months, we had a flat go from being worth 205,000 with just a loft conversion, pre-material hike prices, sell for 460,000. Never would have had that flat if I didn't do the first deal, which just speaks volumes for what you just said.
Yeah, and also I think what's important, so I don't get hung up on opportunities that have been around a while. So when I mean that, right, is that I've bought stuff without planning, that I've had agents calling me up, calling me mad for buying it. Right? But it still made money. It's kind of, I've lost what I used to do in the early days. So if something's not off market, so we don't all get off market deals. Off market in my world is that you're not competing with anyone else. Okay, so you're not bidding against anyone, but you can't always get an off-market deal. And what I've learned is that I don't analyze why something hasn't sold, because if it works for me, it works for me.
Yeah, that's it. You have to do your numbers. And I think we spoke about it briefly, but one of my strategies, particularly in this market, is problem solving. So you mentioned the chap who used to buy fire damage properties. I've been looking at stuff that recently, just particularly because I like them and they're easy to get in and out of, stuff with issues on title, leasehold issues, can't register, all this other different looked at somewhere of a 3-year lease the other day, but you know, I could make it work for me. And loads of people will be looking at stuff and it might scare them off, but if it works for you, and obviously you have to do your numbers correctly and with the relevant due diligence, but you know, if it works for you, you haven't really, like Jerome just mentioned, be too worried about why somebody else didn't like it, because you're doing business for you and not for somebody else.
Yeah, just sort of wrapping up on this, making your money when you buy and not when you sell. I think the last 2 years has taught us all very well that, I mean, personally, I'd rather do 2 or 3 deals a year than 5 or 6, but mine's a slightly different space. The exposure on planning costs are really, really high. So it's like I have to get it right.
Yeah.
I have to.
Your planning costs are, I mean, it's a space that, because of your GDVs, that I think we're going to have to wrap up soon just to make sure that we can share this. But just quickly, what sort of, give me some examples of some of your planning costs.
Planning costs. So right now, since March 2020, when we had a complete reevaluation of life and the business, we budget for each planning journey 235k. So that will include a deposit, non-refundable, and what's left is the planning costs. So that's the model, 235k each deal.
Okay, so that's what you work with. And I think what I'm going to say, I know a load of people have, obviously we've sort of just touched the surface of this planning, but I've had a really interesting conversation with you. Obviously loads of people are going to be listening now on Instagram, so for everybody who hasn't already, make sure you go and give Jerome a follow. For those that are maybe catching up later on YouTube, the link will be below in the bio. But if you're listening on Spotify podcast or Amazon or any other podcast, Jerome, can you give the people your Instagram so they can find you?
So that is Property Planning Gain. I'm going to plug my 10 module property development training program, which I've basically written and created myself. It's with me. It's face-to-face only. It's 15 hours of learning, and that is basically delivered in London and Manchester. If you're interested in learning from a property developer how to be a developer, give me a follow and send me a DM.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's always good. Like, you know, I'm always happy to get people on. I do these lives each and every week just because the thing is, like, I just get to learn for free. Like, I just had to sit down with Jerome. I'm speaking to somebody who's doing bigger deals than I am, who's been in the space for longer than I am, who's, you know, rode different markets. So I'm getting to learn myself. So I'm happy. I hope that you guys are happy that you've got to pick something up today. Jerome, we're actually going to start doing a live in-person podcast. It's called the Property by Kazi podcast. So we filmed the first 5 episodes. We film sort of once a month on a couple of days in the month. So would you be interested in getting involved in one of those?
Yeah, that's something. I mean, as long as you give me notice, then I'll come down to London and do that podcast with you. Yeah, of course, for sure. Definitely. I'd love to do that.
It would be great to get you on. So again, for those that haven't already, make sure you go and give Jerome a follow. Like I mentioned before, this will be our last one until the new year, but we will be back on the first Sunday in January to bring in the new year with loads of great new property advice from new industry experts. If there is anybody else that you want to see on that hasn't been on yet, because this is episode 37, drop me a DM and we'll make sure we get those on. But for everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Cheers. Take care. Thanks,
mate. Take care.
See you. Bye.
Bye.